Are you a bass beginner and are you struggling with your practice or just getting better? Well, there's a potential that you're making one of these 5 mistakes. In this video, I'm going to show you what these 5 mistakes are, what they might sound like, and also how to fix them as well. So without further ado, let's just get straight into it. Now, the first major flaw with bass playing is bad tone. Now, obviously, when you start playing the bass, you're not going to have that great professional tone like you've been hearing on just whatever, Spotify, the records, if you've still got vinyls around. I've certainly still got vinyls around. But yeah, bad tone is the killer to any bass scenario. You've got all of that string buzz and you just don't have that sort of heart which you hear everyone have. Well, firstly, do you know about your bass EQ? Now, that can go a long way to just give you the best setup for it. If you want more bass, turn your bass knob up, and if you don't know what your knobs do on your bass, then look up what they do and figure out what they do. If you've got a standard P bass or jazz bass, the setups are pretty simple. I'll put them here and I'll put it here, and you can see what the standard knobs will do on a P bass and a jazz bass. Now, I've got Stingray, that's a little bit different, but you don't have to know about it. Essentially, I've got volume and then bass, no, volume treble and then bass there. So I can turn up my bass if I want, and I can turn up my treble if I want, and turn up and down my volume. And that goes a long way in the sound production and, you know, what sound you want ultimately. But most of it does come down to where you're putting this hand and what you're doing with this hand. Now, I've got a fretless bass here, so I'm going to quickly switch to a fretted bass, like this P bass here, which has frets, as I imagine most of you are going to be playing on fretted basses. And if you're a beginner, don't play on fretless. You need to get the basic skills down on a fretted first before you do any fretless playing. So essentially, you've got these metal wires that go down the fingerboard, and naturally you might assume, well, I'm going to play in the middle of these fret wires, and essentially you don't want to do that at all. You want to play basically as close as you can to the fret wire as possible. If you've got an F first fret on the A string, you don't want to play on top of the fret, but just a little bit behind, and you'll find that string buzz goes if you do that as well. And that is how you get the best tone on a fretted bass. Simply play right next to the fret. If you play right up here, you just get loads of string buzz, and it just sounds awful, really. So for the best bass tone on a fretted bass, play right next to the fret, and for a fretless, you play on wherever the dot is or wherever the note is in tune for the best tone, because tuning becomes the issue there. But you don't have to worry about that on a fretted bass. So as long as your strings are in tune, you'll be in tune, and as long as you play next to the fret, you won't get any string buzz. Now, some cheaper basses will be a little bit buzzy as well, but you can't blame all of that down to your setup. Ultimately, it is you as well. And there's a big issue with this hand as well. When you look at the positioning of where this hand is, you often find, now, that some people would use a pick, and for standard bass stuff, that's not really what you want. And you'll see people sort of push up on the strings and do all kinds of stuff like that, which is not what you want to do for proper bass fingering technique. Essentially, if we're playing on the E string, I'm going to have my thumb on the pickup. The pickup's just a little black thing or white thing, just a thing that sticks out of the body under where the pickups. You'll see these like metal circles on it as well. On a P bass, they look like this. On a jazz bass, it's different. On a jazz bass, pick the pickup that's down here. Really, you can use either, but I prefer the sound from the bridge pickup. And, you know, in some ways it's sort of easier to play down there because you kind of have to put less force in to get a big sound out of it, I find, in some ways. But on a P bass, we're going to be playing over the pickups, or really a little bit in front of the pickups, but we're not going to be too fussy about that. So don't worry, put your thumb on the pickup. There's a screw in the middle of this one, so I've got it on the screw side towards the end of the neck here rather than the other side. So put it there, get a good grounding with your thumb, and then you just want to press on the string, and you've got 2 fingers that go like this, obviously, and you just want to press on the string. You don't want to pull or pick up or flick. You just basically want to press and pull your fingers through the string, and then you can do 2 like this. But then for this, practice with a metronome and try and get consistent rhythm through it, because you don't want like sort of inconsistent sound. It should just be one sound that just is consistent and just works and sounds nice. But you want to press the string down, sort of press through it. You're sort of doing like that with your finger. You're not really like, you're not flicking up or you're picking up. You're not really arcing your finger in a way. It's still flat, but you just sort of pull in towards your thumb, and you do the same with both fingers. And if you're doing that well and effectively, you're going to get some great bass tone, provided that you're playing at the right spot on the frets as well on the fingerboard. So once you do both those things, you're guaranteed to have a much better bass tone. Work on these things for beginners is absolutely essential, I think, especially this hand, which is sort of the harder hand to get round in some way for the bass tone side of things. It's easier, much easier, to put your hand here and, you know, put them at the right spot on the frets, but this bit is the tricky bit. So work on it for as long as you need to, but remember, press the strings, don't flick or pluck the strings. Now I'm going to keep with the fretted here because I think it's just better for all these beginner examples. But next up, we have got just sort of, where do I put my fingers? Like, how do I arrange my fingers on the neck? Because you'll see people do all kinds of weird positions, and then they've got their thumb over that. And, you know, some of these are definitely valid, like the thumb over, but that's not really what we want to do for standard bass technique. And, you know, for getting you the best efficiency is ultimately, you want to play bass as efficiently as possible. You want to put the least amount of energy in to get the best tone for you. And this does come into tone slightly, but it's more in just sort of your fluidity and how well you can get around the instrument. But you'll get all kinds of positions where you get really closed hands and people putting loads and loads of pressure on. It's sort of natural to do that when you've got all these big fat strings and they just make your fingers hurt, and then you just feel like you've got to really give a lot of handful to get good tone in. And you really don't. Playing lightly is often the best way. Not too lightly that you can't hear anything, but lightly enough that you get a great tone, but you're not getting all that extra clang and you're not feeling like you're putting so much effort into it. It is going to feel like a little bit more effort when you're just beginning, but if you played it for a month or so, you should really get used to it. But what are you going to do with your fingers then? I find if you just take your hand out this, it's a little high five, wiggle your fingers round, make sure that they're all sort of like not tight up, and get your hand really relaxed. Ultimately, you want a relaxed hand, and don't put your shoulder up, this shoulder, or if you're playing a left-handed bass, this shoulder, obviously it'll be the other way around. But don't put the hand that's doing all of the stuff on the fingerboard, don't make your shoulder go up. Your shoulder wants to be relaxed as well. Same with this hand, and this arm can just go over sort of the natural sort of bend in the bass, and then it goes where the pickup is, like I've discussed earlier. But this hand, get it out like this, and then flick it the other way around, and sort of get it arranged in a position like this, where you sort of, your fingers are slightly arched. You sort of got like a C on that side of your hand, and it's sort of like held out. All your fingers are arced, and you're holding it out in like sort of a consistent fist shape. If I could search you, I'll give you a close-up, and then just put that on the fingerboard, and then move these fingers in and closer, and where they naturally rest is really where your fingers should go. And do use your pinky. I know for a lot of beginners that you just don't use your pinky because your pinky is your weakest finger, and you just 1, 2, 3. But you know, I often find, especially for me nowadays, I really don't like using my third finger unless I'm going higher up. If you're going really high up the fingerboard, don't use your pinky, use your third finger. But for this stuff down here, use your pinky, and then do the 1 fret 1 finger technique, and then you can do the technique where you don't use the third finger. That's more sort of jazz traditional-y if you want to get into jazz. But I still think you should practice both methods of using your third finger and not using your third finger, and, you know, see what works for you. But please do use your pinky and try and train your pinky up. It is probably like the most useful finger for when you're getting round stuff. Ultimately, if you can use your pinky, you are really in a great advantage compared to a lot of other beginner bass players, and it is really a big issue, which is why I've separated it from the previous one. Use your pinky is just such a big thing. And next up is tuning. If your bass is not in tune, please tune it. You can get tuning apps on your web browser, on your phone, on basically wherever. You can get your own dedicated tuners as well, and you can get free ones, you can get ones you pay for. But essentially, it's never been easier to tune your bass. So please make sure your bass is in tune every time before you play it, and slowly you'll get better at tuning it faster. You'll realise what your strings sound like, and for times you won't even really need a tuner. It's always good to have one for reference, but you can use your ear for most of these things, and you can even get into using harmonics for tuning, but I won't get into that because that's perhaps a little bit too complex for today's video. But just learning what your strings sound like in tune and always having your bass in tune will make your practice sessions much more enjoyable and easy. If you get in the habit of tuning your bass, then you are again leagues ahead of so many others that just don't tune their bass, and they just start practicing with their bass and they don't even worry about tuning, and they don't even consider, oh no, I'm probably not in tune. Just play what the tab says and go along with it. As a beginner, your ear might not be quite tuned in, but you should still be able to hear, okay, this doesn't sound right. Especially if it's really close on the edge as well, it can sound really, really off. You sort of get to this stage, where you just like, oh my god, like I'm so just out of tune. And getting to that stage as soon as possible and just being like, right, my bass is not in tune, please, I just need it tuned. It's going to do leagues of greatness for you. So please tune your bass, everyone. Before you do it, make sure your bass is in tune, because so many beginners are not doing it. And the last mistake is not learning the fretboard. It may seem like a really, really daunting challenge, but a beginner can easily get through the fretboard, and you can watch my fretboard video over here as well if you want to learn how to learn the fretboard. In those beginner stages, in your first month or so of bass, or even first 6 months, first year, whatever your beginner stage or whatever you think your beginner stage has been or is going to be, you need to learn your fretboard in that time, because it is just going to be so useful to you. And then it's going to be great if you want to start reading bass clef and other music notation that isn't tablature. If you learn all the notes of your fingerboard, then you can understand chord charts and chord harmony, and so many great things will come from you learning the fretboard. Just know, once you get to the 12th fret on every string, and you know all your notes up to the 12th fret on every single string, then you are done with the fretboard. The next however many frets you've got on your bass, this goes up to 20, it's traditional P bass one. It's your 20th fret is going to be the same as your 10th fret. It's just an octave higher, and learning all these patterns of an octave up is 2 strings and 2 frets higher. It's just such a great thing. And then you can realize, oh, this is where all the same notes are, because on a bass there are so many different ways just to play the exact same note. And once you learn what all of those are, and you learn what all your notes on the fretboard are, again, you are well on your way to becoming a great intermediate bass player and eventually a professional bass player, if you want to get into that as well. So please learn your fretboard as soon as possible. If you just learn 1 fret on each string a day, maybe even, or just whatever, and take it through as slowly or as quickly as you want, but make sure you have all of that information down, at least up to the 7th fret, because it's so useful. I've got my bass caught in my chair there, but it's so important to learn all the notes on your fretboard. It will do you so much benefit. So please learn it in the early stages while you're really soaking in this information, and you're going to be leagues and leagues ahead of all the others which don't do this. So please do this. Now, there's so many videos of people telling you how to practice, including myself, and giving you practice tips. But there comes a time when perhaps you've done too much practice, and when should I stop a practice session? And I feel like this question doesn't get asked enough about, so I'm going to answer it in today's video. When practicing, we often have this sort of bell curve perhaps. When you start, you're perhaps at your lowest, and you work your way up the curve until you get to a point
where you've achieved whatever you wanted in your practice session. But there's a bit which doesn't get talked about, is it starts going down towards the end of the practice session, and not quite as far down. Let's say the beginning's there, you can end about there if you really over practice, whereas you want to end up here. And essentially it comes with experience after all, and it depends on the situation and necessity and things like that, but you need to realize the point when you've got the thing and you need to tell yourself in that moment, okay, this is when I need to stop. When you're on that musical high, that is when you want to stop. And let me tell you why. In the moment, you may feel like, oh no, I need to keep practicing this. I'm enjoying this so much. This is so good. You want to stop at that high after you've got it, maybe just a few times. You don't just have to get it after you've got it the first time. Maybe try it again, and perhaps if you fail it for the second time, just leave it there as well. But I would actually say a good thing, especially if you're new to this sort of when should I stop practicing and you're unaware of when you should stop practicing, and you haven't really given this much thought. As soon as you've achieved the thing which you've been wanting to do as a practice session, this is a great way to think about it, that is when you end your practice session. Once you've done the thing you set out to do and you've just done it once and you've done it for the first time, that is where you should end your practice session. Just end it right there. End it on that musical high. You've done the thing which you set out and achieved to do. The practice session has been successful. And while you can do it a couple of other times, that gives you a lot more risk for error, and that does demotivate us, especially once we've just had that high and we start coming down, and you'll gradually realize, I just keep making more mistakes, and then you get frustrated at yourself, and then you reach a point where you're just like, oh, I'm just going to give up. And the thing is, you don't want to reach that point. You want to stay at that high once you've just done it for the first time, especially if you're new to this. Once you've done the thing that you set out to do, then just end your practice session there. And you might say, well, what are the advantages of ending on a high apart from, you've achieved the thing for the practice session? Why can't I just keep working on it more? Surely it's just going to keep getting better. Well, I've partially explained why that isn't the case, as there's a lot more room for error, and often in cases, if it's a real challenge for you and it's been a challenge for you, you'll notice that it will start to fall off as you sort of play it too much. You overplay it and you start making mistakes. And also, another reason why you don't want to do that is you may not think about this when you're playing and learning through things. When you are playing something and you're making mistakes, you are learning the mistakes, in air quotes, essentially. Your fingers are learning the mistakes. If you keep making those mistakes over and over and over again, and you just keep trying to hammer it out and get the right thing out, then that is a bad thing, because you're learning the mistakes. You're making it harder for yourself to not play the mistake if you keep playing the mistake over and over again. So that is when it's time to slow that thing down and stop making the mistakes. But if you end on a high once you've just got it right, you leave less room for you to even need to do mistake correction. There's essentially more work that needs to be done if you keep practicing that affects you negatively once you've reached that initial high. And the main reason I feel it is so important to end on that practice high is because it really makes you want to come back the next day and do the same thing, because consistency is key when it comes to music. Practice makes perfect, but if you're consistently practicing, no matter for how long each day, could be 5 minutes, could be 10 minutes, could be an hour, could be several hours, if you do that every single day and you're consistent with it, and you end your practice sessions on a high, you're always going to feel motivated to get back into the swing of things and just get playing music again. As when you end your practice sessions on a high, you're on that high, you feel so invigorated, so happy and excited about the music that you're playing, and you feel ultimately that you've achieved what you set out to do. And it's one of the greatest musical feelings that you can possibly get, and it's why so many of us and everyone really should be partaking into the art, because it's such a great feeling that personally myself, I don't get anywhere else. And knowing when to stop practicing, once you reach that high, to give you the most amount of motivation going to your next practice session the next day is just so great, and it's such a healthy thing to do and incorporate into your musical practice. So I strongly recommend all of you to do this. I personally do it myself, and although I've fallen down the curve a few times, and we all do, don't beat yourself up. If you do that, it's easy just to keep going. Once you realize that curve, and once you know what your high feels like, then you know that's your time to stop your practice session. As you practice more, you'll know how you work as a musician more, and then from that you can gauge all of this and just have the most happy, productive practice sessions, which is what we all want at the end of the day. So that's it for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one. Happy practicing.